Howdy, Dennis Bradford here. Let's think some about being, feeling, and doing better.
What have sages taught about non-attachment? The previous video covered how witnessing is the means of detaching. Detaching is mentally disassociating from all the contents of consciousness, such as thoughts, emotions, and experiences. Instead of identifying with them, sages become aware of them. They distinguish between consciousness, awareness, and its contents. Sages identify with consciousness, but not with its contents. Although it may be a new idea to you, non-attachment is an idea that goes back at least to the Axial Age. The good news is that we are already what we need to be. Our essence is being. Try to start thinking of yourself not as a human looking to experience being, but as being having a human experience. Opening to being is the wellspring of wisdom, living well. If so, it's not as if we have to gain anything to become wise. All anyone needs to do to become wise is to drop the obstacles to realizing our own essence, our whatness, which is being. There's nothing to be achieved. Simply drop all obstructions, all attachments to enjoy non-attachment. This is the message that sages have been trying to convey for a long time. Since it's extremely important to understand this, permit me to offer you some examples of relevant spiritual teaching. In this video, let's consider some clear examples from ancient Indian sages, as well as from Jesus. The next video begins with some additional examples from ancient China. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna advises, quote, "Seek refuge in the attitude of detachment," end quote. Eswaran translation. The sage, quote, "The illumined man or woman is not attached," end quote. Quote, "It is true that the mind is restless and difficult to control, but it can be conquered through regular practice and detachment," end quote. The sage, quote, "lets things come and go as they happen," end quote. From the Upanishads, Eswaran translation. "The intellect cannot reveal the self," end quote. The self is being, or ultimate reality, which cannot be thought. The self or being is, quote, "formless within the midst of forms," end quote. That's a great phrase that expresses the unity of being and becoming. Since thoughts are forms, being cannot be thought. Quote, "The wisdom sheath is made of detachment," end quote. In other words, being can only be grasped by detaching from thought. The Supreme Brahman, being, is infinite and, quote, "those who know him leave all separateness behind," end quote. Thinking, of course, requires separation. Quote, "The highest state is beyond reach of thought, for it lies beyond all duality," end quote. Again, all concepts are dualistic. So, all conceptualizations, judgments, thoughts are dualistic. Since being isn't dualistic, conceptualizations cannot grasp being. From Shakyamuni Buddha, from In the Buddha's Words, Bhikkhu Bodhi editor. To think is to conceive. Conceiving is a disease, end quote. In the Buddhist terminology, thoughts are volitional formations regarding forms or mental phenomena. I previously mentioned in this playlist the Eightfold Path. It's, quote, "the way leading to the cessation of volitional formations," end quote. It's only, quote, "the uninstructed worldling," end quote, who, quote, "regards form as self," end quote. He recommends detaching from thoughts because his teaching is, quote, "unattainable by mere reasoning," end quote. The second of four jhanas is, quote, without thought, end quote. To be without thought is to have detached from thought. Consciousness, awareness, without thought is no thought. Being without thought does not mean being without awareness. He specifically advises against dealing in speculative views concerning answers to questions like, is the world eternal? Let go of speculative thoughts. He describes his teaching as, quote, the Dhamma of non-attachment, end quote. The Buddha's conception of a master thinker is not one of a sophisticated thinker. Instead, speaking of a master thinker, quote, he will think whatever thought he wishes to think, and he will not think any thought that he does not wish to think, end quote. In other words, instead of being a slave to thoughts, a master thinker uses thoughts as optional tools. Jesus made a similar point. Take, therefore, no thought for the morrow, end quote. The Bible, Matthew 6:34, King James Version. He's talking about dropping anxious thoughts. Quote, why be anxious? Consider how the lilies grow in the fields, end quote. Matthew 6:26, New English Version. Flowers don't worry. Flowers don't think. Flowers aren't troubled by thoughts. Flowers just live as flowers. His point? Instead of incessantly thinking and chasing temporary goods and becoming, focus on being. Set your mind on God's kingdom, end quote. Matthew 6:33, New English Version. He doesn't mean think about it. He means be aware of it, open to it. I hope that you're becoming more comfortable with the ideal of non-attachment. Let's look at what some more sages have to say about it in the next video. Let's end emotional distress.